Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here on Awakening Together. I'm really excited to share this first episode with you. I especially chose my friend and colleague, Dr. Anneloes Smitsman, as our first guest because her wisdom is so wide and deep. She has a PhD in systems change, an international law degree. She's had Aboriginal initiations. She's the author of the Future Humans trilogy, and she offers an incredible, empowering curriculum through futurehumans.world. In the episode we covered a lot of terrain, and we had a lot of fun exploring some of my juiciest topics, some of my favorite things to talk about, as well as hers. So she elegantly weaves together the latest scientific understanding with profoundly embodied Indigenous knowledge, aligned with the intelligence of the cosmos and the evolutionary laws. Her second book, titled Cosmic Architect Tools of Our Future Becoming, has just been published, and that's some of the terrain that we covered. In this episode, we also explored how to unite our individual innate gifts with the intelligence of nature and the cosmos to really turn on these latent capacities, these natural superpowers. It really felt perfect to begin the Awakening Together show by sharing our hope and inspiration around who we are becoming as future humans, especially given the chaos window we are in as a civilization. So not only does Anneloes share her vision of the future potential we all have, but she brings in clear scientific understanding of the new paradigm to help us see more of the patterns of the cosmos as they live inside each of us. And we go on a journey into understanding the nature of system change and how this chaos window moment we are facing on Earth is a tipping point for us all to stand even more in our greatness and our collective imaginal capacities. Truly, our crisis is our birth. So I hope you will receive a transmission of sacred knowing and empowering personal practices through this episode. So please join us and other future humans on the journey of a lifetime into who we can truly become. Welcome, Anneloes. It's so great that you're here. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Me too. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting being in this process of launching this new show for me. My last one was called Heart of It All, and it really feels like a turn of the spiral. For this title is really has a powerful energy for me of awakening together. It's that collective field, like what's possible, how can we really make that kind of system, social system, political system, inner architecture system, these changes and shifts in the collective field. So it's perfect that you are my first guest. And one of the things that, we've known each other for a long time, and I first met you as my teacher in the courses through Earthwise, and just incredible teachings and wisdom. And one of the things that has been so striking to me about you and your breadth of knowledge is how you weave together spirituality, indigenous wisdom, science, feminine intelligence, in and the quantum understanding of the world in a incredibly beautiful synthesis that I think is very unique. I don't think a lot of people actually um, do that kind of synthesis. And I believe that the science and spirituality and the indigenous wisdom, we all know that we need that. You've been actually living it. And the other aspect of you that's so profound for me is, and I really honor you for this, is the embodiment. Yes, the embodiment. And I really hope that we can get into that, because I like to say that we're leaving the age of concept and entering the age of embodiment. There's lots of different names for that transition that we're in, but it feels really key, that one, the embodiment of who we say we are and what we're capable of. And I would love to start with, because it feels right, is to start with some of the wisdom that you gained from your time in Australia. Because the Aboriginal teachings feel like they are, as we know, all the prophecies and all these different the ways of being in right relationship to the cosmos. You have something that is, I think, extremely unique. And it wasn't like you went down for a summer, you did a deep dive. So I'd love to have you share that with us, because there's a lot of people in certain circles talking about Tyson Yunkaporta and his book Sand Talk, which really is some of the teachings of the people from Australia. So I would love to have you share with us a little of that experience.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you so much for this incredible introduction. I feel really honored. Yes. And that's nice to start in Australia. In fact, before Australia, I was living in South Africa, before that in the Netherlands as context. So I was born and grew up in the Netherlands, and then was for 1 year in South Africa. And why am I mentioning that? Is because when I was in South Africa, the energy of the land was very much out there in your face. So that the tribal feeling of it, it's like your solar plexus feeling, and the sacral area as well. But when I went then to Australia, it was like, for me at least, it felt like going back to the roots of humanity. It was this root chakra feeling. And there's so many things that I learned there. First big lesson for me was to surrender and trust in the transformational process. So when I came there, I was around my mid-20s and very eager to discover many things. And I had started a PhD at the Australian National University, where I was combining philosophy, anthropology, and different understandings of time, and wanting to explore the dream time. But as soon as I, was there on the land and honoring the Indigenous people of Australia, it felt like all my plans, everything that I wanted to do, got cancelled somehow. And that I was so eager to get to know myself, to dive into this invisible world. And I didn't realize then the power of those intentions, because I really put it out there to the universe. Teach me, guide me, take me into the dreaming, show me the ways of the sacred laws. Now, I came from a background of law. Interestingly, I had just studied finished a master's degree in international constitutional law and political science. So I came from that Western understanding of law, but also always had been very much in tune with nature. And therefore also had an understanding of the natural law. So then when I really set out an intention to be initiated by the dreaming, to be initiated by the land and the original custodians, it taught me a great trust and surrender, but also a humility, because that process doesn't happen the way your mind wants it to happen. And I remember in those beginning years, because I stayed there for 8 years, in the beginning years, it's like, when am I going to get the big aha? And it was like, first I had to die to all my old concepts, die to all the old identities. It really felt like being swallowed up by the rainbow serpent, and then being digested in its belly, which is a deep death. and then trusting and allowing it, this greater ancestral being, to spit me out when it was ready, not when I wanted it to be ready, but when the process was ready. So it was really through that initiation that I would say was at least 8 years, that it taught me that the process of change, this process of transformation, it has its own rhythm, it has its own laws. We can't force that. But when we learn to work with it, and those were for me then learning about the sacred laws, and then I could also feel while walking the landscape that there are worlds within worlds, and that there are certain areas where you can feel you don't have permission to enter. So you learn to respect that. Whereas a lot of people, when you're coming from this Western mindset, they may think, oh, I like that trail, I want to go there. And if you're not sensitive to this world within world that tells you, no, you don't have permission there, before you know it, you may be entering realms and energies that do not appreciate your presence there. So also that's a lesson of great humility, that the land is alive, it's a being. And then spending time with the rocks, with the cracks within the rocks, within the water holes, and really the listening for what's that consciousness and that wisdom that's been there from the very, very beginning, that's been growing the mountains, been growing the trees, what are its sacred purpose, and now what can it awaken within me? And that then taught me a lot about sacred power, and that power is not something to desire or try to achieve. Power is a great responsibility, because the more power we have, the more impact and the more effect. And to really, therefore, comes the responsibility to grow your power with wisdom and with love. And that's, so many lessons there.
Well, you've named so many incredible aspects of the human journey, and also for this time that we're in, one of the phrases that you speak about is the metamorphic transformation. And I know that we'll get into that more as we talk about your upcoming book, and also your first book, which I want to share this. And I have a passage in here that's the key of imaginal power. So that's here because it feels, first is, how do we actually surrender to a greater intelligence than our own? And you obviously you did surrender. So sometimes people, when they go into ceremonies, will come out and say, resistance is futile. You can't resist that which is greater and truer, and if you do, it will probably it won't feel comfortable. Yes. So that lesson of total surrender feels like what we're also doing as a species. And the other thing for our viewers and listeners is your understanding of systems change. So one of the things about awakening together, as I eliminated, is we have, it's a focus, a very pro-social. It's this like, how are we moving from the capacities of just our individual selves in an awakening process, which we've had individual enlightenment for a long time, a kind of history of that, but the collective space, it's almost like people feel disempowered to have anything to do with the systems around them. And yet we're the architects that we can be that. We're not victims of our future. And the beautiful book is the Future Human Trilogy, the Future Humans Trilogy. And that is, what we need now more than ever is having the attractors to kind of call us forward in right relationship to all life. And just hearing you talk about this, it's been a while since I've heard you speak about that particular journey in Australia. I can see that through line, the perfection of it, and how, wow, you are actually taking the synthesis of your own life and putting it into service with with the books and your teachings and your work with seeds, which I would love for us to talk about. Um, so these capacities that you named, this kind of deep surrender and the trust, I think a lot of people have a lot of fear. And then this relationship to power. So maybe we could speak about that. The what kind of transformation it's going to take for us on the planet. Your dissertation is like the heart of systems change, and you have the systemic barriers, and a lot of those barriers are because of the inner realms, but also how we don't even know how to govern ourselves or deal with conflict. We look to the government and we say, well, you're doing a bad job, and it's like, okay, how will you do a better job? How will we do a better job? So I'd love to hear you speak about that power in the context of this systems change.
That's another great question. And it's really important indeed, because it comes also back to conception. How do we bring something into life? Humans, and especially in this consumptive economy, have been so focused on constantly creating, producing, but without very little awareness and consciousness of the moment in which we and the way in which we bring something into life. So again, going back to what I learned from the Indigenous people of Australia, is that conception begins already in the dreaming. So also in terms of human life. And so when the woman is pregnant, she's pregnant already when she receives the dreaming of the child, the spirit of the child. And that may happen months or perhaps even years before there's a physical conception. And so very often we're looking at how do humans create and therefore also create systems. It's because they feel something is lacking, or they're in competition. And so the state of consciousness that creates the system, the idea, the thought, the project. We don't realize how we are imprinting onto that birth of that system, but what we're bringing into life, we're imprinting onto that also the state of consciousness at that moment of conception, and then the moment of further fertilizing it, and then also how we are birthing it, and then how we are nurturing it. So there are sequences to coming from a pure intention to then partnering with the universe and receiving then the greater power. Understanding it's not just our power, it's this life is power. Life is incredible power. So you're partnering with life, you're co-creating with life, and that power of life now, embodiment, you start to bring that into the world. But then what are the systems in which we are planting those seeds, in which we are impregnating these ideas, these projects? What are the systems within the systems? And this is where you see archetypically that in this mechanistic world, mechanistic perception, which is polarized in a dualistic way. So we have these divisions and disunity and fragmentation. So you birth a great idea, a beautiful potential, an initiative, or even your own powers. You birth that into systems archetypically that are not designed for unity and wholeness and love and actualization, but they are designed to compete, to divide. And there's always this tug of war. So there's a lot of miscarriage, there's a lot of death in there, and so there's a lot of systemic barriers that are imposed and projected onto our human creativity and innovation. And then we get surprised that we said, oh, but it started so wonderfully, and gee, what happened now? And yeah, I didn't want it to become so distorted. And what do we do when we feel it's distorted, or we feel it's moving away from our original intention? Or we kill it, or we want to start all over, or we just abandon it and we start with something new, and so we create waste. So that as humans, we really have to learn, first of all, what is power? And how is life power? And how does that power live in me? What's the power of my thought, the power of my consciousness, the power of my intention? And then what's the power also of conception? And how do I take responsibility and care for supporting something from its pure potentiality into it becoming a possibility, into becoming it a probability, in starting now to take a form, take a shape, get gravity in the world. So now we're starting to come to the moment before the emergence, and then letting it come into being, coming into the world, becoming a concrete reality, and now taking care of it so that it can fulfill its purpose and come to a beautiful process of completion. And then when it is complete, to also again then honor it, release it, and allow all the powers and energies that were invested within it again to be freed and to be returned to their original directions. But let the consciousness, the learning, the information, the experience of it return to the collective field of life so that it can evolve. And then we start to really, really understand, I feel, what it is to be a human being.
Mm, mm. Well, I love your description of the process of creation and what it actually takes to initiate and to stay in right relationship. I think also when you're creating and midwifing new ways of being and structures, that frustration also when it doesn't quite fit into the mechanistic systems around us, or we're Bucky Fuller said, don't fight the existing system, create a new one that makes the old one obsolete. But we're in this real transition zone, so it's almost like we have this context of dysfunction and abuse of power around us in so many ways: our economic system, our political system, our education system, our health system, our media system. All of those are in the collective field. And it feels to me like we have lost a sense of, like, you've given us some really empowering codes, about our own the power of our intentionality, that it is the quality of that and the directionality of that is more important sometimes than we imagine. We think it's going to be the external do, but that action out there starts from the kind of inner coherence and like alignment. And also another is being in right relationship with life, nature. That, I was reading in your dissertation, a passage, and you speak so much about this. This is like there's this cosmic architecture. There's this greater pattern from the inside the neurons of the brain all the way up to the cosmos, so you can see the patterns. And that's if we were educated to understand how miraculous that is and how we are so miraculous, we'd probably feel more empowered, in more ways, because it sometimes feels like you're pushing a rock up a hill. I just think about what it's like for people to have to navigate in the mechanistic world, this kind of world of kind of based on an old scientific paradigm. I think this is the transition.
Yes, that's it.
And a lot of your work, you've synthesized so much, and you have your curriculum and your teaching and your books, and is the synthesis of a, a, a transition map
Yes.
for a thriving civilization, for thrivability. Now let's just say that again. You've got keys for a transition map for a thriving civilization. Now that's pretty cool. I would say that should be headline news. Headline news. Everybody, students, teachers would go, oh yeah, let's talk about that in my class tomorrow. But it's almost like we don't even have that kind of sensing organ. So it's almost like we have to be like the mycelial, creating, embodying it. So I would love to hear you talk about that transition plan, and so that people, we have the sense of the barriers and our creative potential, and then how do we actually put it together? Because I think a lot of things are still so piecemeal, in
Mhm.
the strategies that we've got, and people are duplicating efforts over here, and there's another platform that's going to do that kind of thing. And the diversity is brilliant, but it's almost like, where are we creating the coherence?
Exactly, exactly. So, let's begin again with why do we need a transition? And we need it because the current systems, the current growth models, and underneath that, the growth archetypes that are driving those models are driving us towards collapse. So they're not only unsustainable, they're undesirable, they're quite often destructive, but they are also by design. It's not a coincidence. So we've become really good at creating a world that doesn't work. Now we need to grow up and learn how to create a world that works for all and not just humans. So the transition is, and we could say, of course, it served its purpose and we learned a lot. And we also need to remember, of course, that when we designed a lot of those systems, with the thinking of that time, we were with about 1 billion people. We're now close to 7.5 billion people. So the scale is completely different right now. And of course, the technological impacts also is very, very different. So we can't quite compare those times. And so important also to put that into context. If you have a destructive system that you think is doing a great thing at a small scale, but now you're amplifying that everywhere, of course, the impact is going to be a lot more. So the transition is really about understanding that those systems, they serve the purpose. We learned a lot. They gave us also a lot of good things. That not to forget also that we also do enjoy the modern life, and we are enjoying the technologies here as well. We are able to have this conversation, and so let's honor it also. So it served its purpose, but it cannot take us to where we need to go. And that's so the transition means that we're trying to improve systems that by design are not sustainable. And we just think that we're going to invest more, put more money into it, or start to fine tune a little bit here, or maybe add a little bit of wiring, or let's add some AI. Yeah, it's not going to make it much better. So the transitioning is an evolutionary leap. It's a leap into conceiving a very different archetype, a very different growth model. And that means indeed going back to that cosmic architecture, that architecture of life itself. So this is where in a lot of my research I've worked on. Cosmos means ordered wholeness, so that the deeper implicate ordered wholeness of the universe itself, this cosmic architecture, how does it give rise to the informational dynamics of life? So what is the relationship between cosmic architecture? Could we even say cosmic architecture of consciousness, not just the universe? Maybe they are one and the same. And could it be that we can start to see that in the informational dynamics of life? And the informational dynamics of life, we can recognize as an evolutionary process. What we can see then is that there is a trend from when the universe first came into being. It was not as complex, but it came in a state of great coherence, in an incredible unity. And the thinking has been for quite some time now that the further in time we go, the more entropic it becomes, less coherent. But what recent research is showing in cosmology is that that's actually not true. There's a deepening informational coherence as long as that information is embodied. When it becomes disembodied, this is when we start to see that things create their own systems, but they're no longer in touch and in tune with the greater wholeness, so they're becoming destructive, like a cancer cell. Cancer cell will duplicate, but it will duplicate, but not differentiate. So it doesn't stay in tune. It's not part of the narrative in which it is embodied and embedded. So it just goes exponential until it takes over and it causes a collapse. Same with the viral patterns. So what we're seeing is that what we've been working with, in fact, because we've been so driven on, we want to have exponential growth and we think growth means progress. We've been mimicking viral patterns. We've been mimicking unconsciously these cancerous patterns, growth, but not developmental patterns, not evolutionary coherent patterns. So for a transition map, the first thing, number one, is to be aware what are the archetypes, what are the parameters, what is the coding of the systems that is driving our societal development. How is that also impacting our personal development, our education, our governance models? So that's step number one, to really be aware what are the systems under the systems. What's the belly of the beast, so to say, and what are we feeding it? Why does it keep growing? Yeah. And is that what we think is growth? Is that developmental growth? Is it evolutionary? Does it help us become more aware? Does it help us to become more compassionate? Does it help us to understand and live in interdependent and right relationship, as you just said? So that's step number one. And step number two.
Before you go to two,
yes.
Can we unpack that just for a little bit? And maybe you're going to be getting to it, but I really want people to have a sense of the archetypal energies, because underlying it all, it's almost like we are invited to know thyself. Know thyself. If we don't know at the deepest level, it's like the uncovering, the deprogramming, the kind of noticing our assumptions about things. I love the process of David Bohm of check your assumptions. And you can see how we live inside of these assumptions about what's right and what's growth and what's mine to do and what I can't do, and all these limiting ideas that have us be such small versions of ourselves as humans. And one of the, you started through the Earthwise Center, the tipping point system, and then
Yes.
you created the Wisdom Collaboratory, which was my deep honor to participate in with a number of these incredible humans. And it was such a field of collective intelligence. And there's a lot to share about that, but that the fact that we can claim as individuals to step into an aligned field with awareness of the natural growth of evolution from 13.8 billion years towards greater freedom, consciousness, and complexity in the most beautiful way is like, oh, right. So, wow. And we're syntropic, not entropic, like actually to like feel life, giving life, giving life, giving life is the way of things. You look at, I'm here in winter in Seattle, and the little spring buds are just happening after the death of the winter. So there's something about people like landing what you've just shared in our bodies of like, what can I awaken in myself that is dormant? And I know we're going to get to the 5 future archetypes, because I think these are so empowering. So this tipping point, this transition plan, I really want to just kind of land that a little bit more deeply for people.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yeah, so number one is be aware of the archetype in you through which you grow. Yeah, it's really important. And if it's just one or several, and that's indeed the 5 future archetypes, we'll talk about that in a moment. But what is your own growth pattern? What is your own developmental pattern? Do things need to break down before you have a big aha? Does it have to be painful before you feel you can wake up? How do you push yourself to the edge before you stop and go within? And because these are some very bad habits that we as humans collectively have created, and with that a lot of assumptions, belief systems: no pain, no gain, the belief that you have to push yourself and stress, so we stretch and stress and put pressure on so much ourselves, but also our planet, and look what we're doing. But there's a pushback. It comes back, and now we are getting the pushback, yeah. And we're getting also the feedback of hundreds, if not thousands of years of pushing systems beyond their limits to the point of collapse and breakdown. So these are the systemic barriers. So while thinking we are growing and developing ourselves in societies, we have unconsciously, perhaps even unintentionally, created phenomenal systemic barriers for thriving with life, barriers to our regenerative capacity, barriers to our transformative capacity. Now we want to address the sustainability crisis and resolve it, but we're not mapping out those systemic barriers. We're not addressing that. So you go into a consciousness that creates these barriers to then create the solutions and then expect that we're not carrying over those same mindsets into the new systems. That we can't transition that way. So the transitioning is a tipping point. A tipping point is a point when there is a structuring recoupling in a system. So a tipping point is always an irreversible point where a system can no longer regress back. So when you're coming out of the womb, there's no more going back into the womb. That's a tipping point. It's a birth point. So there are many of those points. So the transition that we're needing is not a superficial change transition. It's a transition of a tipping point in consciousness that is not just about critical mass. It's a tipping point to higher orders of reality, where there's far greater coherence, far greater unity. And then from that greater coherence and unity, then giving birth to new conceptions, new ideas, and new systems that by design are regenerative and able for us to thrive with life.
So let's talk about that a little bit more, because that key piece of this inner shift and then the collective inner shift, like what it takes for us together. I feel like this work and what you're naming and what you're pointing to and what you're kind of a stand for and what I'm a stand for is, and so many of my soul family in our community and is much larger than I think we imagine. I feel like sometimes it must be like when Paul Ray, the sociologist, when he was writing his book, Cultural Creatives, he was doing these kind of surveys of people, and they discovered that everybody who was technically value-wise a cultural creative thought they were alone. Well, now we have the technology to realize that we're not, but it's almost as if we are at that moment of a supersaturated solution where we're so close, it's a phase change, it's that quantum leap. And when we understand we're in a quantum world, we can actually have faith in a theory of transformation and metamorphic transformation. I would love you to talk about that, because that distinction is so exciting, is that the system will shift. And we're laying down all the groundwork right now for that. And it's so hopeful, even though it seems like, for example, supersaturated solution would be a lake that's water and it's getting cold. It's really, 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 really cold, but it's one degree away. And you throw one ice cube in, and that ice cube, the whole lake freezes. So you can have this idea of like, whoa, it was water and now it's ice. That transition. So I want people to kind of feel like the hope that I feel in myself of what's possible and where we are in this kind of like tipping point moment, this collective awareness. It's almost like there's a field of coherence that we're more and more are standing in, of that awareness. And I'm curious how you would name that for people to feel the hope of how they can bring their beautiful, clear, bright, and loving energy leaving behind. They've done the work to kind of leave behind, or they're ready to do that, to kind of join in consciousness, in intention with others who are also holding these same visions. I feel like we are like the social body of the future humans, and the humans, the new humans who are here, or like Barbara Marx Hubbard, my mentor and colleague, she would speak about the awakening of the new species. And we would say to each other that we are members of the new species, whatever that means for different people. It's not to say we're better than, it's never about that. It's like we're recognizing who we truly are and what we're truly capable of, and how we can be that future attractor. How did you have it in here, the how to become a state attractor for the future potentials that are currently trapped in the local human dimension.
Where do you want me to begin?
Yes, wherever. I know that was a lot. You just begin, just go dive in. Whatever feels resonant.
Yes. So the question was, how can really people feel and tap into this also, so that it gives hope, right, during this time?
Yeah.
I think in order to get to a place of hope that is grounded as well,
Right.
it's important to understand, again, coming from transition, how there are two ways in which a system can really change in a metamorphic way. Yeah? One is because the current conditions that were sustaining the systems are starting to break down. So I call that the necessity of change reaches a critical stage. So this is where you just feel, I just can't keep going anymore. Yeah, if I go one more step in that same direction, it's going to collapse, or it can already have manifested in terms of loss or death. But when you just feel you're forced to change, and that's not a nice place to be in. So that's one way in which life tends to change. Yeah? But there's another way, and that is the one of the future humans and future human potentials and the imaginal power. And that is by activating future potentials of higher orders of reality that are already imaginally present within us, like the imaginal discs. Yeah.
This is so important and such a key thing. I want you to just say that over again. And I want people to really let this land, that these future potentials are inside of us now.
Yes, exactly. So these future potentials that represent higher orders of reality that already exist right now, but perhaps not yet manifest in our local reality of the human mind, but that already exist. They're part of life. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So these future potentials, and also as in its expression as future human potentials, that are like the imaginal cells, that they're like the stem cells of consciousness that give our life and our world an evolutionary boost. They are already part of your field. That's really important. They're already
very important.
Of your field. Yes. And the wizards and the sages and the magus and the alchemists, they knew that. They knew how to activate and work with that. And then we would see these incredible change processes. But for them, it was actually a conscious process. It was not something that they just made up like that. Yeah. But we've lost the art of that for a lot of the people. And a lot of this knowledge hasn't been part of the mainstream. So these future potentials of higher orders of consciousness, higher orders of reality, therefore higher orders of possibility, hence future, are part of your field. And as they're part of your field, you can connect with it. How do you connect with it? By entering into the consciousness state that has the resonance, that has the right match for that information. Because these potentials are also potentials in consciousness. So your imaginal consciousness is your consciousness in its future state, and your imaginal consciousness in the consciousness state of future possibility, yeah, creates that right bridge, that right linking. So that, and how do you experience that inside yourself? You may be experiencing it as when you feel you're about to give up. You go, how else, or what am I to learn from this? And how do I take my next step? It suddenly feels, as you kind of call out for that, and you get this determination, I know there's another way, even though I may not rationally know what it is, but I just know in my heart that is a next step.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that this next step has my back. I know that this next step is a step of love. I know that life wants me to flourish, wants me to thrive. I know that life right now, the cosmos itself, the universe itself, is partnering with me. I may not have understood what it is about, but it's reaching into me right now. And then in that moment, when you surrender again and you open up, that's when that information, those future human potentials now start to activate inside of you, of these higher orders of your reality. And it's like your mind suddenly shifts and you start to see things and become aware of things that you say to yourself, huh? That's amazing. I was so focused on this. I wanted that. But it's so much more. And all this time I could have done this. And okay, I don't know the path, but I can feel my life force returning. I can feel life returning. Now I feel hope again returning. I feel empowered. I want to live. I am alive in that future. I live in that.
You live in that, and you are grounded here, and you
Yes.
become like an emissary for that future potential for humanity. So this isn't, it
Yes.
isn't just because the future humans isn't just an individual journey. This is actually, we are all in this together in a more unified way than we have perhaps ever been, except for in our small tribes and more communities earlier in time and different pockets here and there. But what you're describing gives me so much hope, because I am a futurist. I don't put that out there and kind of announce it that way, although I just did, didn't I?
You live the life of the future human. You embody that.
I do. Thank you so much. I do. Barbara and I used to laugh about that and be like, we are members of the new species, kind of claim it. But it's almost like we have, I want to name a scientific fact for people. If we think about our potential, and we think about the quantum world versus the kind of industrial thinking and the indigenous thinking and the wholeness that we're in, and the doorways to our greater potential, even when things are collapsing, that actually, as you were describing, I think this is a very important point for people to understand. The dynamics of systems change, that it's I think Irvin Laszlo speaks about it as the chaos window, that it's only in the chaos window that you can actually inject into the systems, because it's so incoherent and unstable, a coherent structure, idea, energy that can then puncture through that. Otherwise it just will, it's so entrenched as these institutions that it's almost like impossible to move. So this breakdown that we're in is actually extraordinary, and we can see it as an opportunity. I think you've just been like describing that as an opportunity, and how we can awaken these capacities in us. And there's a lot of the science in our Western mainstream science has spoken about for years, the junk DNA. And if we think about how life works, that there's no junk. So makes no sense that we have junk DNA. So what is that DNA waiting to be activated in us? And if we unpack all the DNA, boop, 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 and unpack it, depending on if you think there's 50,000 cells or or trillion cells, or 100,000 trillion cells. It's a large number in the body. There's a lot of cells. And if you stretch out all that DNA, it's like 5 billion miles of DNA. 5 billion miles of DNA coil are inside your body. Do you think that's just junk, or do you actually feel that that's dormant potential that is like
latent
all
capacity.
this potential? So I would love is it a good time to like this, something I want to read here. This is from your book. When you realize how your choice takes place in consciousness and how the universe is a body of consciousness, you start to understand how we each are also a mything link for evolving life. Without the deep lure of becoming, I mean, there's the strange attractor. People will remain asleep within the systems that keep them from accessing their mythic abilities. Education and media today are alienating people even further from the true power of their psyches. Those are Anneloes' words from the chapter on the new mythos, The Key of Imaginal Power. I highly recommend this book. And the next one is coming out, so you're in time. Read it and then get the next
It's out
one.
right now, Return of the Avatars. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. It's out already. It's so good.
Yes, yes. And I want to add something to what you said, was you pointed on something very important, this chaos window, right? Now, again, a lot of transition research has focused on the dynamics of creating critical mass and shift state changes and all that. But what there's been very little research on, and I think this is critical, is that, so in this chaos window, it's not just the restructuring or the breaking down of old structure. There is an influx of imaginal consciousness. And this is really important to realize, because think of the imaginal consciousness as your immune system. Yeah? So a part of your body, when you're going through an illness or an other stress, there's a part of your body that's not in the disease pattern. Because it's not in the disease pattern, it's in an imaginal state. It's able to learn. When we go too much down, we're only local. We're no longer in touch with the unified field. We're completely in distress. And so the attention becomes dualized. Now, what happens then? So if there is a stress condition, a collapse or a breakdown, there's this pressure again of change. So say that that there's an injury on your finger. Now, the body, life itself is designed to heal. So life itself will start to, in that moment of where there's an injury, it will start to regroup, repattern, repair, rebuild itself. But it does so in that moment. There's a doorway that opens up from the non-local to the local, and that's the imaginal consciousness. So there's an influx of imaginal energy, which is like that stem cell. That's like that potency from the unified field. There's an influx of that. Now, when there's an influx of that imaginal consciousness, which is your stem cell capacity, which is your evolutionary boost. Now, we talked earlier about state of consciousness. That is a superpower, really life-given. Yeah? But if we then imprint upon that influx of imaginal consciousness, influx of imaginal potency, if we imprint onto that, these lower states of consciousness, these lower programs, and we go back into divide, rule, conquer, compete, we've missed a phenomenal opportunity. And now we are then using that imaginal power to empower the old programs. So we get ourselves further stuck.
Okay, so this is really important. I'm glad that you're speaking about this, because this gets to when you began, you spoke about power. And you were talking about power, and then you also used the word responsibility. And this is, I think, there's a responsibility that we have when we are given power, or we actually have these capacities to steward them well on behalf of all life. And I find that as we get closer and closer to this kind of uh, quantum leap, that it feels to me like we're at a threshold. I feel like we're standing at this incredible threshold. And the more people kind of claim it as like, okay, we're in this together and we're not going to fall into the old dynamics, what I see is people saying, oh, I'm not rivalrous. I'm in game B. I'm anti-rivalrous. But then you can see the subtle rivalry.
Yes, that's
And
it.
that's like, and then I notice, okay, you've got an amazing person over here, let's say amazing person who is like brilliant, blah, 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 but they have subtle rivalrous behavior. And
Yes.
then if someone we're all cells in the larger social body, someone says, oh, I want to give feedback to you to show you something, that you're not seeing. And then there's resistance to the feedback. It's like, I see that so often, this need that we have, so we don't slip back, that we need to be able to receive feedback from others who are giving it lovingly and with discernment and wisdom. And maybe it's strong and it hurts your ego, but without it, we don't make the kind of change and transformation that's needed. So I'm curious how you've seen that weave in with these new capacities that are really latent and natural attributes of ourselves that have been dormant, because the systems around us haven't been, well, we haven't been ready as a species. And maybe some of them were, they're like the avatars, and now it's more of a collective capacity that's about to like shift.
Yes, and this is where you need a lot more than just unity, because there's a lot of movements and it's beautiful. They focus on the unity and the love, and it's really, really important. But it's because what I'm talking about here, when you have this influx of the imaginal power, that's life-giving, because there's so much breakdown, which also happens in a lot of death. So so this is why is there a renaissance after a middle age? Okay, why is there a renaissance after so much breakdown and change? Mm-hmm. It's because there's increased imaginal consciousness, and this starts to move through the arts and the philosophies and the sciences. So there's an impulse of this renewal. But here's the key, and it links in with the capacities that we need to develop. When that imaginal power, that imaginal consciousness, now it starts to enter into the human experience. What is its experience now of itself as life? What's the first imprint that we give it? This is so important. And that's where, what are now the structures and the systems and the organisms, the bodies in which that influx can be born. So this is how we also began. And that's where our deep work is. So if we are, for example, we have a large gathering and we've all been in this unified field, we felt the love and the coherence, we've been singing and hugging and all of that, we felt great, yes? And then comes the next day. And the question that people have is now what? How do I take that into my life? What do I do with that? And they go back to their old jobs, and now they feel even more miserable because they had this incredible unity experience, and it feels as such a contrast in the way that they have to be in the world. Yeah? So the frustration is growing. Or do we now ourselves, that's our first invitation and intention, say that I welcome this influx of this imaginal power in this time of breakdown and breakthrough. So I welcome this imaginal power of life within myself. And I choose, so this is the power of choice, I choose to give that power an experience of what it means to be human in great wholeness and from a place of love in right relationship with life, and in a way that it can fulfill its true intention in a way that's life generative. Yeah, now that's a mouthful, but it's really important that you learn to hold it first, not spend it immediately. If we immediately externalize it and we spend that energy, we're not working with it for our own transformation.
Mm.
When we hold it, now we embody it. This is this embryonic state. We become alive to the embryo in us, our own future human potentials. That little future human potential, little egg, it starts to now impregnate within us. It's our own self, but it starts to become impregnated in our local reality.
Mm.
But it now needs to grow. It needs to grow its new sensory organs, its new capacities. These are the 5 future human archetypes. Yeah? It needs to become a whole system. What I've seen with a lot of people is that they'll keep it at the level of a vision, an idea, then an aspiration, and then there is the big gap between what they would like and desire and what they see around in the world. And then they have a difficulty holding it all the way to the next step to develop then the necessary capacity. So when I said yes to my own future human potential, and that was a very, very conscious decision I made while I was in Australia, and I went through a deep death experience. And I was really shedding the old skins, shedding my old life. I then also made the commitment to stay with that process within myself and to become who I needed to become so that that intention could be born, so that that potential could come into the world. Mm-hmm. And to be patient with that and to hold that intention that may I develop the capacities within myself that are needed for this change, rather than saying, I better just sign up for this course so I can develop that skill, so I can apply for that job. It's a very different focus.
Yeah, I love this invitation to stay with it and let it incubate these new capacities, because I know so many people are in such a birthing process for themselves, and maybe even afraid that they don't know if they can figure it out, and that actually you don't have to figure it out. You have to surrender to this greater intelligence, but also staying true to yourself and your uniqueness as well. It's like such a key piece. And I think, you're asking about how we actually put it into manifestation, and maybe you could tell a little bit of the story of your implementation with seeds, because seeds is a very real initiative. It's a very cutting edge new currency. There's a huge community around it, and you've been really foundational with the Constitution and this innovation with weaving in the 5 future archetypes, which I love. And when I heard you share that, I thought, well, this is the best news I have heard. They're putting that into their system. That's brilliant. I'm like so happy. So maybe you could share that with us, because a lot of the listeners and viewers, I imagine, are on the edge of cultural transformation and in the new systems and creating new ways of being in community and economics and politics. You also have been doing some with that too. What is like an evolutionary democracy look like,
Yes.
So maybe you could share a little bit about seeds with us.
Sure, my pleasure. Yeah, so seeds is both an ecosystem. So it's an ecosystem for the new governance and new economies, regenerative economies, where it's really about prioritizing the planetary health and well-being together with human health and well-being and thriveability as one large ecosystem. Therefore, understanding that requires completely different algorithms than and different policies and different goals, and also therefore different constitutions than the current systems. So it's both an ecosystem of the new civilizations, and it's as an experiment. It's a huge global experiment where people from all over the world are coming together bringing together their talents and the love and the passion and their skills and showing up. I think that is the greatest success of seeds. It's in how it's as an attractor, how it's and self-organizing principles, how it's really bringing people together in this experiment. And seeds is also a currency. So it's a new digital currency, which again, by design, rewards regenerative behaviors. Where it gives funding to projects that are really helping this transition. And therefore, indeed, the governance structures also are based on a very different idea of democracy that's inclusive, deep democracy that's participatory, where as a citizen of seeds, you're really part of this, of co-creating the seeds universe. And therefore, as one of the lead architects, indeed, of the seeds constitution, what I did is to translate the cosmic compass that is part of the Quest of Rose and Return of the Avatars, the Future Humans trilogy, into a thrivability compass, and then converge that into the Constitution, so that the Constitution itself is a compass for how we navigate by that North Star of thrivability, and how that we make therefore the decisions about what is a priority, what are the data that we're using, what is the feedback that we're implementing, how do we see progress and success here, how do we reward what behaviors, where do we say our no, where do we say our yeses, because the boundaries are really important too. It's also important to say,
they're like membranes.
Yes, they're like membranes, exactly. And therefore the 5 future archetypes, which together are like a system, and they are like the butterfly code, source code of the butterfly, really, of that metamorphic process. They are therefore part of the seeds constitution. And Haifa, which has been developing a lot of the Web3 tools, the DAO, the DHO, and the tokenomics, has implemented the 5 future archetypes as part of its role model. So if you want to apply for an assignment, or you want to make a contribution to the ecosystem and be paid in Haifa seeds also for doing so, then you can apply for one of those 5 roles. And you can learn to navigate in each of those roles as well. So yes, it's now really part of the whole foundation. And also, as part of the seeds constitution, are the 3 evolutionary principles or laws of life. The law of existence, that existence itself is unified, that the law of change, that life itself is a process of evolutionary change, of increasing complexity, but in a way that's evolutionary coherent, and the law of balance, that life creates also the conditions for self-conscious experiences, for being able to actualize the cosmological potentials that are given if we honor that law of balance. Yeah.
Oh, can you describe the 5 future archetypes? Name them.
So the first one is the wholeness coder, and that's all about code consciousness. So the wholeness coder, when we are in that archetype, it will help us to raise the questions of what's really the design of the system? Where are my choice points? How is it coded? What's the deeper structure? So wholeness coders is the archetype that helps us to become conscious that there is a code of wholeness, that life itself is a code of wholeness, because we live, the universe itself is a unified single entity. And so it helps us now to apply that code of wholeness in the way that we are designing and architecting our systems. The second one is the future creative. When we are in the future creative archetype, we step into the imaginal consciousness. So that's the one that creates the pathways, that opens the new possibilities. These are the visionary, the inventors, also the rebels, the ones that are there to, to ask the questions that maybe nobody else wants to ask. They're the path makers, not just the finders, path makers. So they create the new futures, future creatives. Then the next one is the evolutionary catalyst, and that's when we step into evolutionary consciousness. They're the ones that help us develop the capacities, They are really focused on facilitation, on evolutionary learning, on evolutionary development. And this is where in the metamorphic stage, we are in the cocooning phase. While when we're in the wholeness coder, we are in the code, in the imaginal discs. When we are in the future creative, we start to spin the cocoon. So we start to actualize the first step of actualization of these huge potentials. So the evolutionary catalyst now, they know how to cocoon, they know how to work with breakdown, they know how to work with transitions, they really have that evolutionary focus, how to go from old states to new states. And then the fourth one is the pattern weaver. So that the pattern weaver helps us to develop our integral consciousness. So this is where we develop now not just our new evolutionary senses, but also our organs, and the organs become systems. So the pattern weavers are the ones that are creating the right connections. They are working with the pattern that connects rather than a pattern of breakdown and a pattern of disunity. So pattern weavers, they weave the realities, they weave the mycelium networks, they weave the root systems, so that this greater vision can truly become physically manifest. They're also the collaborators, the kind of reaching out, and they see the patterns, they notice, they think in terms of patterns. And then the fifth one, and that's when we've come out of the cocoon, we're becoming that butterfly, is the new paradigm storyteller. So the new paradigm storyteller, they are the ones that really now embody, they're the embodiment of this entire process. They are the butterflies now. They communicate the new story and they fertilize it. So it's like when we are in our new paradigm storyteller capacities, then we are developing through the thrivability consciousness to really keep seeding and fertilizing our world with this, our future becoming.
Mm. I hope everyone got as excited hearing that as I am. I've done Anneloes' training in these 5 future archetypes, and I highly recommend those on the Earthwise Center. And what I want people to feel, I loved hearing you share all that. It's very inspiring, and it's very illuminating as well, because they're like tangible handholds, and for everyone as you're listening and watching to kind of see how they feel in you, as Anneloes was sharing. And because you are implementing them inside of an ecosystem, a global ecosystem like seeds, that is really, and you worked with their constitution and been like one of the lead architect, it's probably a very unique early prototype for a new way of governing. And I know that there's so many initiatives that are trying new ways. We've seen all the different, the evolutionary collectives, the different ways of using software, agile software, and beyond teal, and all these different, beyond reinventing organizations. People are really expanding into new ways of operating systems, right? We're really, I think what I want to name is that we are talking about, this whole conversation is about the new planetary operating system.
That's it.
Yes. And so do you know of any other communities or ecosystems or organizations that are doing what Seeds is doing with these 5 future archetypes and with this kind of constitution?
Well, I mean, I don't know if they have the same constitution, but I do trust that what's starting to emerge in the collective consciousness is really working through so many. So I would never want to say that this is exclusive to us,
Yes.
And I'm really looking forward to meeting others who've been working with similar ways, because there must be, if this is coming through us, it must be coming through for others as well, because the time is ripe for that. But what I have heard as feedback is that this constitution is really unique. In fact, tomorrow I have a meeting with the Law Society in Europe, who invited me to be part of a discussion around that, as they're looking actually at constitutional redesign, in the laws that have really been implemented in a parliamentarian way. So this is just to show you, even that there's interest there, I thought was fascinating. I didn't reach out to them; they reached out to me. They found out, and so I'm really feel that there is, that the time is ripe for this, and that even within the conventional systems, that's really my point here. People who are, there are many future humans in conventional systems who are looking for the next evolutionary step, and who are also looking for how to change and find the little openings within also the existing mainstream systems, recognizing that they're not future fit. So I think that the experiments are not only happening in these whole new paradigm experiments like SEEDS and like HiFan or like the Regen Network and many others, but I think that there's also, and this is I find what gives me great hope and find it very powerful, that there are people within existing systems that are acting as imaginal cells. And there is a great movement within law as well, where a growing trend of recognizing, the ecocide law, for example, as well, where the recognition that we need to not only create new laws or update our laws, but we need to think of a whole new way around law and the purpose of constitutions. The SEEDS constitution is based from the understanding that every living system has a constitution. So the cosmic architecture, the informational architecture of a living system is its constitution. So it's translating that into what does that mean now as living evolutionary constitutions that are then the living constitutions for human governance for now and long into the future.
Wow, I can see how that gives you great hope, and me as well. And I didn't mean to imply that you were the only one doing that, but it's a unique context.
It's a unique context.
It's a unique context that is very exciting. And it also is a strange attractor.
Yes, that's right.
It's like, wow, you need those examples of the prototyping of it. And because it's got economics, because it's new forms of organizing, because it's in right relationship to the earth, those conditions are really powerful for, how that can be seeded. The fact that it's actually happening in a context like that is really thrilling. So,
yes, and it also it went through 1 year of 8 consultations, collective consultations, where hundreds of people will come into the assembly calls, give their feedback, give input on the Google Docs. So it is also a beautiful example of the collective intelligence. My role was really then to hear all of that. So to look at what's the kind of, again, the archetype, the deeper structure underneath that can really express now that collective intelligence, that collective intention, this collective vision, and so that it can thrive and so that it can emerge. And when I share this with my good friend, Dr. Marianne Bozizan, who's a member of the Club of Rome, she went, okay, that's courageous because you put a stake in the ground. When you do that and you really bring it together now as a constitution, now it's no longer just an aspiration. So you put a stake in the ground. And
this is the fact that you have your law background, and then you have cosmic law and sacred law and divine law, and that you're bringing them together, that you hold that deeper energetic of really how things work, what is the operating system of life itself. The fact that you hold those and then you could translate it into a constitution, that's pretty inspiring. It makes me feel really, and the fact that the Law Association Society, is it the Law Society?
Yes.
Yeah. have invited you to speak. Wow, that just gives me so much hope as well, um, for the shift in our governance systems. That there's even kind of new interests like that from the inside, as you're saying, from the
Yes,
inside of
I
these
really feel
systems.
that. Yes, yes, yes. There's more, as you said, there's more emerging that we sometimes realize. I
Yeah,
mean, you made
yeah,
such a good point earlier when we're working on this that we may think we're alone and as if it's not happening or
right.
but
Well,
yeah,
it reminds me of just the opportunity we have to know that there are so many others, even if we can't see them. It's like the mycelial web of the rebirth. It's
yes,
underground, it's invisible. And because we don't have a media system that is supporting all this, we have little pockets of it here and there. And I hope that Awakening Together will be really an example of the
yes,
new
yes.
paradigm storytelling. And but I remember in the foreword to Peter Russell's book, The Global Brain, the second edition, he had written, the first book was in the 70s. That was pre-internet. And he had no idea that other people around the world were
Mm.
doing things with the global brain or talking about the global brain. And then when he did the second edition, he kind of shared how he had to catch up and how thrilled he was to learn of all these other people seeing and feeling the same thing, of this collective wholeness that are the noosphere, or this
Yes,
thinking layer around the earth. So I feel that as well. And I also want to honor you as like a very early pioneer in this.
thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. Mhm.
Well, this has been fantastic. And I wonder if there's anything we could do a whole show on future archetypes and other things. So we can do that in the
I'll
future.
come back. Yeah.
Yes, you will. You'll be coming back. We'll have Anneloes for part 2 and 3. Um, how would you like to close, and share with us anything that feels like left
Yes.
unsaid?
Yes, for those of you who are listening or watching, just take a moment to what's now come alive within you and around you. Just take a moment to be present because you are part of this field. And if you're listening and watching, then you're probably living into the same questions, and these are the same future potentials that are bringing us together. So just want to complete it with this reflection. Just
Mm,
be present to what's alive in you and to be grateful for finding each other right here,
mm,
right now, in this moment of our world in becoming.
mm, mm. Thank you, Annalise. That's always a welcome invitation to like slow down and receive the gift of what has been shared and how it lands in each person. And I would love for you to let people know how they can reach you, obviously on the in the different places where people are finding this, on YouTube and Roku TV, and on different platforms for podcasts. Your long and lengthy, beautiful bio will be there with links. But what's an easy way right now for people to find out more about you?
Probably just go to futurehumans.world. Then you will find also the Future Humans trilogy and a work there, and earthwisecenter.org. That's,
Perfect. Yeah,
thank you so
everything is
much.
linked, everything is connected.
That's it. Exactly. Thank you for doing this, Sheri.
Oh, yes.
Been amazing, and for being a voice,
Mm,
what's alive in the field and seeking to be expressed. So
mm,
thank you for voicing and being our voice in this.
mm. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for being here, and joining us with your wisdom and your insights and your stories. And also, everyone, thank you for joining Awakening Together, and we'll see you next time.